obviously, Brian, to mute their audio so we don't get the fire trucks, airplanes, kids, dogs, all that stuff in. I can hit mute all as well, but sometimes it doesn't get everybody. As far as video, I'm gonna mute my video as well. It's up to you. We want to focus on Brian's presentation. He's got his screen shared already. If you cannot see it, let us know like right now, so we can try and do something about that. More people joining. Hi, Michelle. Oh, she's not on yet.
Hi.
Hi there. Hi, Michelle. Okay, so this is wonderful. We've got 50 people and climbing here. Again, please everybody mute their audio and video if you can leave your video on if you want, but we want to focus on Brian's presentation. If you can't see his screen, let us know. Please use the chat box for questions. I will try and field those the best I can. So if something comes up during Brian's presentation, send a chat out. I will record that and make sure I can see it. And then we'll use the chat that way to ask Brian questions at the end. Because we've got over 50 people now, and it'll just be a little bit too crazy, I think, to turn this into a discussion. So please use your chat box with questions, and we will leave plenty of time at the end to address those. So onwards, my name is David Carr. As you probably know, I'm with the Finger Lakes Institute at Hobart William Smith College in Geneva, New York. I manage the Starry Stonewort Collaborative. This is our first of at least 4 webinars through the summer. I might try and ask some more people to do some more as we go down through the summer and cram those in, because I think there's interest and there's wonderful research going on right now on Starry Stonewort, its control, its life and habits, and all this good stuff. So today we have Brian Ginn from the Lake Simcoe Regional Conservation Authority in Ontario, Canada. If you don't know where Lake Simcoe is, it's kind of, I looked on a map this morning, it's kind of due north of Toronto. Looks like about an hour drive. I don't know, Brian, you can correct me, about 80 miles north of Toronto. If you look at it, you know, in the same map as the Great Lakes, it looks little, but it's not a little lake. It's very large. I don't know how big, but I'm sure Brian could fill us in on that too. He's a limnologist up there, Dr. Brian Ginn, excuse me, sorry Brian, he's a limnologist for the group. And he's going to talk to us about his experiences and efforts understanding and monitoring their issues with Starry Stonewort up there. So with that, I'll send it over to Brian.
Okay, thank you very much, David, and thank you for everybody who attended this morning. Wow, we got almost 60 participants here, so that is fantastic. As David said, yeah, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat bar, and we'll address those as we go along or even at the end. So what I'll be talking about today is kind of our aquatic plant studies that we've done on Lake Simcoe up here in Ontario and Canada. And really, it's basically the story of tracking the spread of invasive starry stonewort that we didn't know that we had until about 10 or 11 years ago. The organization I work for, the Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority, there are 36 of these conservation authorities across Ontario. And they were started in the 1950s to deal with flood control. And since then, they've kind of branched out into the environmental monitoring side of things. And really, our conservation authority is rather unique because we have this big lake in the center of it. And that's part of our jurisdiction for monitoring as well. So where Lake Simcoe is located, I'll start off with a satellite shot of the Great Lakes region, showing the 5 Great Lakes that I kind of stole off one of the NASA websites. Lake Simcoe is located right here, and if you can see my cursor here on the screen, we're kind of halfway between Lake Ontario and also the Georgian Bay portion of Lake Huron. And we're actually connected to these 2 Great Lakes by a canal system called the Trent Severn Waterway that kind of works its way through the south central part of Ontario. Lake Simcoe itself, we are the largest lake in south central Ontario. We're about 280 square miles in size, and that makes up about 20% of the entire Lake Simcoe watershed. The lake itself is relatively shallow. The mean depth is around 15 meters or 50 feet, and the maximum depth is kind of on this side arm of the lake here, and that's about 137 feet or about 42 meters. The lake is divided up into three bottom. Here, this is kind of a nutrient enrichment southern embayment. Yeah, so Cook's Bay is this kind of nutrient-rich southern embayment kind of at the bottom of the lake. And Kempenfelt Bay is kind of this western arm. It's very deep and very fjord-like. And then the rest of the lake is called either the main lake or the main basin. Watershed is home to almost 500,000 people. That includes some seasonal cottagers that drive up during the summertime on weekends. And it's a very important resource for recreation, tourism, and also boating and fishing. We're the ice fishing capital of southern Ontario. I think 80% of the fishing on the lake occurs during wintertime when people just walk out on the ice. And we're also important in terms of drinking water as well to lakeside communities, such as the city of Barrie, which is located on the western part of Kempenfelt Bay. Right here, the population is about 150,000 people. Also the city of Orillia, which is home to about 30,000. Then there's two towns at the bottom here, Aurora and Newmarket, that have a combined population of around 180,000. Lake Simcoe is what I like to call one of the other Great Lakes. So just like Lake Champlain and the Finger Lakes region, we're not the 5 main Great Lakes, but we're also great, maybe not in size, but also in regional popularity for it as well. And these other Great Lakes, what I call them, are really key to understanding environmental problems on the larger lakes because they're manageable size. You can go out for a day, collect a lot of data and a lot of scientific information, and then come back on the shore and then research it afterwards. And like Lake Champlain and the Finger Lakes, Lake Simcoe is experiencing the same environmental problems that they're having on the 5 larger Great Lakes as well. And this helps what we learn on these smaller lakes. We can actually scale up onto the larger Great Lakes. So our role with the lake monitoring program on Lake Simcoe is we were started in 2008, and our primary objective is to address the concerns of residents with what's going on with the lake and fill in data gaps that had existed in lake monitoring. So we work with the Provincial Environment Department, or it's now called the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, and also the Natural Resources Department in Ontario. So the Environment Department has been monitoring on the lake since the early 1980s. They look after offshore water quality and the algae and the zooplankton side of things, and also any reports of pollution. Ministry of Natural Resources look after the fisheries aspects of the lake, and the Conservation Authority really looks after pretty much everything else. So water quality in the shallow water zone, things like aquatic plants and invasive species. And we also investigate new and emerging issues on the lake as well. So things like climate change that are taking place and also invasive species. So the 3 key stressors to Lake Simcoe are pretty much the same as environmental stressors on lakes across the Great Lakes region. The nutrient phosphorus, increasing phosphorus concentrations is one problem, and then the problems that cause with increased aquatic plant biomass, algal blooms, and also aspects of when these algae and these plants die off, declining dissolved oxygen concentrations, and then the impact that has on the cold water fish community in the lake. Invasive species, things like Dracaena mussels. We have both zebra and quagga mussels in the lake. Also invasive aquatic plants, which is why we're all here today. And their impacts on the native biological communities in the lake, and also climate change. So changing water quality, water quantity, and also impacts to recreation. As I said, most of the fishing pressure in the lake occurs during wintertime, and then with a shortened period of ice cover, the impacts that has. These 3 stressors don't act independently of each other. For example, climate change, changing rainfall patterns can impact how much phosphorus is being driven to the lake. Warmer waters makes it easier for invasive species to survive. And also things like zebra and quagga mussels can restructure how phosphorus is being circulated around the lake, and also the impacts that has, particularly on shallow water quality. So aquatic plants, which is what I'll be talking about today, are, at least on Lake Simcoe, probably the public's #1 lake concern. Over half of all the inquiries, the phone calls we get, and the emails we get at the Conservation Authority concerning the lake concern aquatic plants. In Ontario, they are legally protected just because they're so important for fish habitat, especially warm water fish habitat and the bait fishery and so on. And they also buffer wave action to reduce erosion. So for this reason in Ontario, you can't go down and just start ripping them out of the lake. You have to have a permit, it's strictly regulated. And I think if you have a shoreline or a shorefront property, you can only remove a narrow swath, either to provide a swimming area or also to get your boat in and out to a dock. So rather than tell people how to deal with plants, we kind of attempt in any way to educate them about how to deal with them, tell them that they're supposed to be present in healthy lakes, but the amount increases when you get surplus nutrients or also increased water clarity as well. Every plant nerd has kind of a favorite plant species. So the picture at the side here, this is the bladderwort, and that's probably my favorite one just because it's one of these carnivorous plants that kind of traps zooplankton and so on. So it's actually one of the plants that's very rare now in Lake Simcoe. It used to be one of the dominant shallow water plants. Now it's greatly reduced due to invasive species. So there have been a few previous aquatic plant studies that were done on Lake Simcoe. Starting in the 1960s, residents started complaining about excessive weed growth and shoreline accumulations that take place along the shoreline. And this picture kind of down at the lower right shows some of these aquatic plant wash-ups that happen. It seems to be every fall when the plants start dying back, they die, they come up off the bottom, and then with the winds and the waves and so on, they get washed up on whatever shore happens to be downwind of where the main plant growing areas were. So in response to these complaints, in 1971, the first study was taken out on the lake by the Ministry of the Environment in Ontario. It did kind of a lake-wide survey to kind of find out where these complaints were coming from and if plants were really as bad as what people seem to think they were. They found 29 species of plants in the lake. Cara, or muskgrass, was kind of the dominant shallow water species. They found out the plants really weren't as bad as what people thought they were. There remained 6 areas of high biomass, kind of in sheltered coves and kind of along muddy shorelines and so on. But most of the lake was virtually plant-free. Unfortunately, we can't really compare directly the data that they found in 1971, which is unfortunate. They kind of lumped how the plants or the density of plants in the qualitative categories. So they lumped where the plants were heavy in concentration or moderate or even scattered. And it's interesting to note that when I went through, one of the 29 species on this list included Nutella. And I've always been curious, that is actually Nutella, or maybe this is actually one of the first reports of Starry Stonewort or Nipolopsis in Ontario or in the Great Lakes region. But unfortunately, that's the one species that they didn't include a picture of at the appendix at the back of that report. So it's kind of lost in mystery, and there's no samples that I've been able to find anyway that exist from that one study. So after the 1970s, about a decade and a half later, the Provincial Ministry of the Environment went back and they studied one part of the lake at this time, Cook's Bay, which is that southern embayment that I said, which is very nutrient rich. It's also got a soft sedimentary bottom on it as well. So they focus, and it's really the highest concentration of plant densities in the lake are in this one embayment. So they focused their study on Cook's Bay, and they finally did the qualitative and also quantitative studies as well. So they had wet weight biomass, which they used. And when we do wet weight biomass now, we can go back, resample these same sites. They mapped exactly where the sites were, and we can go back, resample these sites, which we did a few years ago, and directly compare what the plants are like now to what they were back then. So in 1984, Cara, or muskgrass, was still dominant. And this also included the first report of Eurasian water milfoil on the lake, which was found in Cook's Bay. And that accounted for, at that time, about 12% of the total biomass of plants in Cook's Bay. 3 years later, they went back, they repeated this 1984 study. Cara was still the dominant species, but Eurasian water milfoil had greatly increased in biomass. In 2006, the next study was done, and the Conservation Authority, before we started the lake monitoring program, contracted a consultant, an environmental consultant, to do a plant study on Lake Simcoe. And again, they focused their efforts on Cook's Bay, used ponar grab sampling, which is what we continue to do today. And coontail at that point was a dominant species, and Eurasian water milfoil still made up about 40% of the total aquatic plant biomass. So the methods that we've been using over the past 10 or 12 years now, we've been doing ponar grab sampling on the lake. We've adopted a lake-wide approach to find out where these plant areas are. So in 2008, first year of our program, we went out and we sampled 215 sites on the lake, and we set up our sampling strategy for using some transects that are parallel to the shoreline, excuse me, and we sampled at discrete depth intervals. So we sampled at 1, 3, 5, 10, and then 20 meters leading out from the shoreline. In 2013 and 2018, we went back, we kind of cleaned up, extended a few of the transects in some key areas. So we wound up with 244 sites. And we also sampled in the middle depth too. So between 10 and 20 meters, we sampled at 12 and 15 meters depth. The maximum depth of plant colonization that we found in 2008 was around 10 meters. And in 2013, 2018, the sampling at the 12 and the 15 meter marks were just made to make sure that the plants hadn't expanded into a deeper depth range. When we actually did this, any sites without plants, so anything deeper than 10 meters was removed from analysis. So in 2008, a total of 181 sites were used, and in 2013, it was 184 sites, I believe, that were used in the analysis. What we did with this biomass data is we sorted them into species, weighed each species at each site. We did dry weight biomass, and then we ran this through GIS-based Kriging analysis. And we used this to map out areas of high plant biomass in Lake Simcoe. For tracking the Starry Stonewort expansion, which we've done in the past 2 surveys, we've actually used a presence-absence data, so kind of a 1 or 0 that we input into the Kriging analysis model. And from that, that allows us to find the probability of finding Starry Stonewort at one location. So a 1 was where we had collected a Starry Stonewort sample, and then basically the probability of finding a Starry Stonewort spreading out from that 1 sample site. In between those kind of 5-year studies that we've done, we've also done an annual survey as well, starting in 2017. 2018 was the Large Lake Survey, and then in 2019, we sampled a subset of about 50 of the 244 sites for aquatic plant biomass. So we use that with the Ponar grab sampling to achieve the biomass. And we've also done the rake toss sampling as well at targeted areas, so marinas and boat launches. And this is basically because you can collect a lot more kind of the qualitative sample than you would capture with a smaller Ponar grab sample. And we did this to check for invasive species. In 2019, we, through partnership with the Starry Stonewort Collaborative, who is my host today, we helped them test the Survey 123 app. So we used rake toss samples at a subset of these 50 sites as well, and reported where Starry Stonewort was found in the lake. So it's really a slick little app, kind of a mobile phone application that you can download, or an app that you can download. And the GIS coordinates are taken off the phone. You just input the water body, the water depth at the site, how you access the site, if you could see Starry Stonewort, the density that you collected on the rake toss, and then the percentage of Starry Stonewort in the sample. This sample from the Starry Stonewort is not this one site, so that would be considered a dense sample, not a sparse sample as shown on the rake toss density. So it really is great, and then this data gets uploaded and then it's printed out onto the ArcGIS map, and our GIS team on our side could actually log in and find out across the region anybody who tested this app where Starry Stonewort was being found. So the results of our survey, so over the 10 years of study, we found 23 species of aquatic plants in the lake. Typical plant diversity that's found across the Great Lakes region in nutrient-enriched lakes, things like coontail, muskgrass, again, water weeds, lots of pond weeds, and so on. 3 of these species are invasive. So the 1984 studies done in Cooks Bay found Eurasian water milfoil and also the crispy leaf pondweed. And in 2009, that's when we started seeing the presence of Starry Stonewort in the lake. Yeah, these are just the maps that get plotted out from the Kriging analysis in ArcGIS. Green color is that we picked to represent the plant density. So the darker the green color, the more plants that are present. So in 2008, this is where plants were present in the lake, and these darker green areas are the areas of the higher biomass or higher concentration of plants. And it was interesting to note that we found 7 areas. 6 of them were pretty much the same high aquatic plant density areas that were found in the 1970 survey as well, with one addition, the city of Barrie on the west, on the far west here of Kempenfelt Bay kind of picked up as well. The reason why these areas are kind of home to plants is that they contain the environment that plants find hospitable. They're very shallow, so there's lots of sunlight, and they're also sheltered. They're kind of tucked in on these tiny embayments, or they're also on the leeward side of islands as well. So the dominant winds blow from the northwest here kind of to the southeast, so they're all sheltered in these sheltered areas. 2013, we recorded an increase in plant biomass. There's a lot more of the darker green color. And then in 2018, there's a very large increase. So in terms of mean dry weight biomass, it's increased fivefold in Lake Simcoe over this 1 decade. And even the maximum amount that we collected in a sample has increased as well, from 3.5 kilograms to 26 kilograms. So that's almost 50 pounds that you're pulling up with one of these petite Ponar grab samples. So a large increase, and most of that increase is due actually to Starry Stonewort. So changes in the species diversity. So this graph just shows the proportion of the lake-wide biomass, and then the colors of the different plant species, and then the 3 lake-wide sampling years. So in 2008, the community was mostly coontail and Cara, as shown by the green and the blue bars, with Eurasian water milfoil also a significant proportion of it as well, shown by the yellow bars. We found Starry Stonewort in 2009, so after 2013, that's when it started to be noticed. You can see the red bars with their Starry Stonewort start to increase. So over the 10 years, a decrease in all species and this massive ramp up in Starry Stonewort, which is now over 2/3 of the total lake-wide plant biomass in Lake Simcoe. It's an interesting note that kind of this 2013 or this transition year, there seemed to be a slight increase in the Eurasian water milfoil before it was ultimately displaced by Starry Stonewort. So just to focus from the lake-wide studies onto the longer record, or the longer period of record, focusing on Cook's Bay, which I said is this kind of southern embayment. It's got a river that delivers a lot of nutrients into it. It's got a lot of soft sediments at the bottom. So the original studies in the 1980s used wet weight biomass instead of dry weight biomass. So I kind of, so where the previous slide showed dry weight biomass, these ones show wet weight biomass now. So there's a large increase up to 3.5 kilograms on average per meter squared. Yeah, so these blue dots just show the wet weight biomass average in Cook's Bay that was found throughout the sampling years. There's a slight increase from the 80s to after the 1990s, and maximum depth of plant colonization increased from 6 meters to 10.5 meters. And this is just due to an increase in water clarity through phosphorus reduction strategies that helped decrease some of the algae that were growing in the lake. And also in 1991, zebra mussels got into the lake, followed in 2004 by quagga mussels. And of course, the effect that they have is the same as across the Great Lakes region, where there's a large increase in water clarity just from mussel filtration. Increases after 2011 here are all due to the presence of Starry Stonewort that was found in Cook's Bay. So a large increase, especially in the past 2 years, as Starry Stonewort really took over in the shallow water habitat. It's always interesting to note on this graph is that 1987, that one study kind of turned out as an outlier for high plant biomass. And it was really the highest until kind of the 2010 or the 2011, 2013 surveys. And the reason that I think that why it was so much higher in 1987 is because out of all the sampling years, that 1 year was 1.4 degrees Celsius warmer than any of the other sampling years. So I think there was a lot more favorable conditions for plant growth in 1987 than what there was throughout the sampling record. So Starry Stonewort, the reason why we're all here, so the initial reports on Lake Simcoe that we had for this is that arrived from Eurasia. The study is well known. First official finding was in New York State in 1978. Found off the kind of the upstate New York shoreline on the St. Lawrence River. There was a previous record that was found of it. There was a museum specimen that was collected in 1973 or 1974 from south of Montreal, and that was actually predates this New York State record. So it was either misidentified or wasn't correctly identified, and it was kind of taken and put into a museum, and that's actually probably the first record. By 1983, it had been found in the Detroit River and Lake St. Clair, so it had spread probably throughout the lower Great Lakes by this time, that being the top end of kind of Lake Erie. In Ontario, the first official Ontario record was found in Presqu'île Bay, a study by Midwood et al. In 2016, which was published in Journal of Great Lakes Research. Their sampling in 2013 had found it in Presqu'île Bay, and it kind of spread along kind of the northeastern Lake Ontario shoreline as far as Kingston. I thought for sure there was an earlier record from Presqu'île Bay than 2013, but I haven't been able to find it recently. So if anybody knows of an earlier record in Ontario than this 2013 one, I thought there was one from the early 2000s in Presqu'île Bay, but I haven't been able to find it. So in 2009, we took a benthic sample from the area shown on this red dot right here. So we go out every October and we collect benthic invertebrate samples as part of our monitoring program. And when these samples were analyzed, unfortunately due to staff shortages, they weren't analyzed until about 2011. We found these distinctive white stars that were included in this benthic invertebrate sample. So one of our staff members kind of brought them to me. We weren't really sure what they were, and they kind of sat on a desk. And then I remembered I had been to an invasive species limnology seminar probably about 5 or 6 years before that. And yeah, that's when I remembered. And I talked to a researcher at Cornell University, and he said it's likely Starry Stonewort. So by 2009, it had arrived in Lake Simcoe at least. It was probably there before then, which means it was probably in Ontario long before the 2013 first sampling report that they found. Continuing on with the initial reports, in 2010, we had a marina at the outlet, which is shown by the green dot on the map, that called in on us that said we have a real problem with aquatic plants and want something done about it. This picture just shows one of their boat slips that happened, and that is all Starry Stonewort mass that's kind of floating on top of the water there. This marina had received permission from the provincial government to spray a herbicide, which is diquat, as a treatment for Eurasian water milfoil. In Ontario, use of herbicides to control aquatic plants is strictly regulated, and there's a lot of hoops that you have to jump through if you want to apply them. So they had received permission from the Environment Department, so they had sprayed it. Diquat was effective in dealing with the Eurasian water milfoil, but unfortunately it killed off all the competition that was keeping Starry Stonewort in check, or at least it seemed to be, and then it really took over in this one marina. Continuing on, we also did some studies. In 2011, we resampled the original sites from the 1980s. We found Starry Stonewort had spread to Cook's Bay, so that orange dot kind of in Cook's Bay in the southern section there. So, and we found out that Cook's Bay was present in a little under 15% of the sites and made up about 1.4% of the total aquatic plant biomass. In 2013, as part of our whole lake survey, it was found at the locations identified by the blue dots on the map, and it accounted for 23% of the total lake-wide aquatic plant biomass. Just looking at the Cook's Bay sites, it had increased from 1.4% of the biomass 2 years earlier to about 6% of biomass. So it had increased by about a factor of 4 just in those 2 years. And the method of spread is kind of this clockwise pattern around Lake Simcoe, and that follows both the current direction and also most of the boat traffic as well. It tends to come in from the eastern side of the lake and then kind of move in a clockwise direction around the lake. Next report that we had was in 2013 and 2014 in Lagoon City, and this is a lakefront community. Location is shown by the yellow dot on the map. This community was built in the 1960s. They got permission to actually take a wetland and kind of plow it in and carve it out and make one of these lakefront communities where every house or every property was guaranteed to have kind of waterfront properties. You can tie your boat up right outside your house. They call it the Venice of Ontario because the system, the whole city is kind of an interlinked system, these little canals sort of thing. Problem with having shallow dead-end canals with no water circulation is that they're perfect habitat for aquatic plants. So they have had a lot of problems with Eurasian water milfoil in the canal system. In 2013, they received permission from the provincial government again to spray diquat or herbicide to deal with the Eurasian water milfoil. It was effective, but they did nothing to treat the amount of phosphorus runoff which was going into the community. So the first year they had a bloom of blue-green algae that kind of took over and reduced the amount of recreation that people could do in the water. And ever since then, so since 2014, the second year, they've had massive blooms of Starry Stonewort or massive biomass increases. And they've had backhoes in there that have been taking out tons and tons and truckloads, dump truckloads and dump truckloads of Starry Stonewort during the summer just to keep these boating canals more open. So the trends in Starry Stonewort, so just like those biomass maps that I showed before, these are the ones using the systems of ones and zeros, so is Starry Stonewort present or not. The green dots and the green areas show where Starry Stonewort was found in Lake Simcoe. So again, 2008, we found none. Our first record was in 2009. By the 2013 survey, it had been found kind of up in the northern section of the lake, along the entrance from the Trent Severn waterway right here, and then kind of starting to pop up in shallow water habitats where the other plants were found as well. By 2018, there was a large expansion of it. So all this green area now that we found is Starry Stonewort. The only area which did not have it was the western part of Kempenfelt Bay. And then in last year's plant surveys that we went out, we found it had reached the city of Barrie as well. So it's probably lake-wide in distribution by this point. Increase in the proportion of the total plant biomass, rapid increase over 10 years, and is now 2/3 of the entire aquatic plant biomass in Lake Simcoe, and it's actually now the dominant shallow water species in Lake Simcoe. I had a reporter come up to me and ask me last year, I heard that Eurasian water milfoil is dying off in Lake Simcoe. That's good news. And I said, well, it is for Eurasian water milfoil and dealing with that, but the problem is now something even worse has replaced it in the lake. So continuing on with Starry Stonewort in Ontario, it's what I call an under the radar invader. So we found it in Lake Simcoe, which is this the yellow pin is kind of put onto the map. Wasn't widely reported. As I said, we didn't really know what it was when we first saw it, and then we found out what it was. And I immediately went to the Ontario Invasive Species Reporting Act. We have this EDDS maps that the provincial government uses to track invasive species. Went to report it, and it wasn't even listed on the site. So I thought maybe we are, in fact, the only place in Ontario that may have this. So I contacted them, and they said they were going to look into it. And eventually I grew frustrated with it as the years went on. So it was a couple of years and it still hadn't been listed on the reporting website or in the reporting app. So I gave up and I reported it on the USGS invasive species site as well. So that was our first report that we had. We had to use the American side of things. And I've talked to other people around the region as well. And somebody actually got in contact with the people that run this invasive species website. And they said they only list invasive plants and invasive animals. And where Starry Stonewort, although it looks like a plant, it's technically a macroalgae. For that reason, it's not included on our invasive species website reporting app. And it'll take several years to change policy, I guess, with this organization to get this listed onto the reporting app. So just by communicating with other people around the region, we knew it was present in Lake Simcoe. We wanted to know where it was. So over the past few years, I've kind of put together a report of sightings and where it's been located. It's fairly widespread across south central Ontario. As I said, there is this Trent Severn waterway which connects Lake Ontario to the south, to the Georgian Bay portion of Lake Huron to kind of the northwest. And when you plot the track of this canal system through, that's probably exactly how Starry Stonewort was transported through south central Ontario. And now if you talk to people who reside on any one of these connecting lakes, it's pretty much anywhere where you look at in one of these lakes along the Trent Severn waterway, it seems to be present. So really, it's not that we never had it in Ontario. It just seems to be that it hasn't been well reported, and there has been a lot of information about it as well. People don't seem to know what it is, and then once we start spreading the message on what it is, it seems to be getting more and more reports going on. In the last year, so all of these lakes are pretty much connected to one another, so boat traffic can move freely between them. There's a lock system that moves back and forth. In the last year, we had two really disconcerting reports. I think somebody's on here from Big Cedar Lake, which is located about here along the Trent Severn waterway. Big Cedar Lake, correct me if I'm wrong, is not connected to the Trent Severn waterway. And so we're actually finding reports now of Starry Stonewort being present in lakes that are off this kind of main shipping channel as well. So definitely overland.
You're correct. Big Cedar's not on the Trent Severn.
So it was probably overland boat traffic, I guess. Somebody trailered a boat in that would have probably brought it into Big Cedar Lake.
Yeah, it was found at the boat launch, the public boat launch.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So that's Big Cedar Lake. That's one site, and also we also monitor stormwater management ponds or stormwater detention ponds. I think they're called in the United States. They're used to treat urban runoff. So you have kind of these pools or these water that kind of capture the surface runoff and are used to treat pollution and so on before it's discharged into rivers and lakes and so on. So in the town of Aurora, Newmarket, which is south of the lake as well, we monitor probably about 50 of these stormwater management ponds, and in two of them we found Starry Stonewort present last year as well. So because they're not used for recreation, there's no fish in them or anything like that. I'm assuming it's part of the flyway between Georgian Bay and also Lake Ontario. Lake Simcoe is a great stopover, and geese and ducks and so on are probably stopping over in these stormwater ponds. Already present, and there's some evidence that Starry Stonewort can be transported by being captured up into the feathers of waterfowl as they fly from place to place. So what are the consequences of this in Ontario and probably across the Great Lakes region as well? We're seeing increased wash-ups of this plant material. So the original plant complaints that we had on Lake Simcoe, we get these massive pile-ups of plant debris kind of in the fall along the shoreline. Any shoreline that's downwind of these plant beds, you seem to get these massive wash-ups of things. This results in increased complaints from the public to local municipalities and the government agencies to do something about this because people don't like it. And also anything that relies on shallow water, things like marinas, beaches, shoreline for recreation, shallow water, boating and swimming and so on, will also be impacted as these Starry Stonewort kind of takes over here as well. The marina where we keep our research vessel actually has a lot of Starry Stonewort in it as well. So they have students hired and also a backhoe that they go in and try to keep the shipping channels free so people can get their boats in and out of their docks. There's also an ecological consequence to Starry Stonewort as well. So it's not just the human impact as well. If you look at kind of a native plant community, it almost has this underwater forest lake structure. And even with Eurasian water milfoil, it had kind of this canopy on top, but under the surface of the water, it almost had like an underwater forest with thin stalks that kind of look like trees. Lots of nooks and crannies for bait fish and the smaller fish to kind of hide out, and especially for fish predators as well, things like pike and muskie and so on that kind of hide out in the plants and in the shallows. There was lots of spaces where they could hide out and they could dart. So really an underwater forest. And when you switch over to a Starry Stonewort type thing, it forms these massive, what they call pillows, or these massive aggregations of the algae, tightly woven together. There's really no place for the fish to get in there and to hide from it as well. So you really are restructuring this shallow water environment well. You're getting these walls of Starry Stonewort that are kind of pushing the smaller fish and also the fish that rely on those plant habitats for shelter and also for nursery space as well. You're kind of pushing them out into the open water, and it's because of that they're more vulnerable to predators and so on. There's also a consequence that we think might be happening in Lake Simcoe to phosphorus loading. So this graph, we measure about 3 million data points per year to come up with the phosphorus loading for Lake Simcoe. So this graph is just basically the up and down axis, or the y-axis on the left, shows the total phosphorus load to the lake in tons per year. Years across the bottom, and those bars are the total phosphorus load, and then the different colors are the source that the phosphorus is coming. So rivers and tributaries and so on are the green bars, and also sewage treatment plants, septics, and also the atmospheric loading to the lake. The black line, we have a phosphorus reduction strategy, which is in place on Lake Simcoe, and our load goal is 44 tons of phosphorus loading, because that should translate through to a dissolved oxygen level in the lake of around 7 milligrams per liter to protect the cold water fish habitat and the cold water fish populations as well. Loading has been above that, and based on that, and in the background, you can kind of see this pale kind of blue kind of mountain range like thing, and that is the flow volume. So the total flow volume coming out of the tributaries. You can see years with high tributary flow relate to high phosphorus loading into the lake. So phosphorus loading goes up and down, and limnological theory says that if you change the amount of phosphorus going into the lake, you should change the phosphorus concentration in the lake. So the second graph is just the spring weighted, volume weighted total phosphorus concentration in the lake. It was high in the 1970s and 1980s. Phosphorus reduction seems to have worked, and it seems to be having a downward trend. And now it meets the provincial water quality objective of less than 10 micrograms of phosphorus per liter. You can see the trend in the lake is not really reflected by what's going into the lake. So the loading and the phosphorus concentration seem to be disconnected from each other. So one thing that we started looking at now, especially with this massive loading, we had 131 tons in 2017, 2018, and that should result in a phosphorus concentration in the lake of somewhere around 13 to 18 micrograms per liter, and there was almost no response that took place in the lake from it. So we have this phosphorus disconnect from the between the loading and the concentrations that are in the lake. We know that phosphorus is coming in two forms. It's particulate phosphorus and also the dissolved phosphorus. So particulate phosphorus, there's a lot of documentation in the Great Lakes region that this is being removed by quagga and zebra mussels. That's probably also what's taking place in Lake Simcoe. But this results in an increase in dissolved phosphorus. But really, there is no trend in dissolved phosphorus in Lake Simcoe as well. So what I'm wondering is, are macroalgae, especially Starry Stonewort that are in the lake, are they uptaking this dissolved phosphorus? So macroalgae aren't rooted in the sense of traditional aquatic plants are. They can't get phosphorus or nutrients from the lake sediment. They have to take it from the surrounding water. So is Starry Stonewort kind of a phosphorus sink? So all this extra dissolved phosphorus that we're getting in the lake is just being uptaken by Starry Stonewort. And that's something we're going to look at in the years moving forward. We're going to start research on that to find out what the uptake rates are for Starry Stonewort. It's interesting that Cara or muskgrass, which is closely related to Starry Stonewort, they're both in the Cariaceae family. There was a study that was done in Poland in the mid-1990s that showed Cara can uptake about 94% of available dissolved phosphorus in a lake, and that results in a huge increase in biomass. So based on the amount of biomass in Starry Stonewort that we have in Lake Simcoe and the amount of phosphorus loading that we think we're missing, there's probably around 20 to 30 tons of phosphorus, which we think might be residing in the Starry Stonewort biomass that is in Lake Simcoe. So how do we manage Starry Stonewort? And this is particularly problematic in Ontario. Herbicides, as I said, they're limited effectiveness against Starry Stonewort from what I've read in research articles. And in Ontario, only diquat, or it goes by the brand name Reward, is permitted to be used. And this is 100% not effective against Starry Stonewort. In fact, it kills off anything that's competing it and kind of keeping these massive Starry Stonewort masses in check. Copper, I've read, has some effectiveness against it, but where Lake Simcoe is a drinking water source, I'm kind of hesitant before we start adding phosphorus to drinking water, what the human health effects would be on that. In terms of manual removal, it has been done in some cases. It's partly effective, but it's very labor intensive and has to be repeated often. Also, there's a lot of spread by fragmentation. So if you don't get all the little Starry Stonewort bits, it tends to spread around. If you're in the early stage of an infestation, or if it's a localized site, there has been some evidence that it's effective against that. And also the stars or the bluegills as well. You have to collect all of those, or the following spring they're just going to hatch out kind of into a whole new Starry Stonewort colony. In terms of Ontario as well, we're working our best to communicate, also educate people about it. Boat launch inspections is something that has been done in other areas, but they're either limited or not done in Ontario. On Lake Simcoe, most of our boat launches are either free or they're also self-serve as well. So if you go to one of the town boat launches, there's kind of a ticket, unmanned ticket thing where you just kind of tap your credit card and you pay your launch fee and get a parking pass for the day sort of thing. So there's really no education that's taking place at the boat launches. So we might have to do something about that. Also, they're not very effective after the fact as well. So once it's already into the lake, really what can you do once it's in there? And we're slowly making progress with our messaging as well. So we're trying to get the message out to other smaller lakes and so on to try and prevent the spread of Starry Stonewort across further than what it already is across the province. So that's about all I have on the Starry Stonewort story in, at least on Lake Simcoe, with touching on other bits in Central Ontario anyway. As I said, our aquatic plant monitoring, we've seen a 5-fold increase in 10 years of the aquatic plants. Based on studies from the 1980s, there was an increase of water clarity, but most in this 10 years, almost all of this increase has been accounted for by Starry Stonewort increases. And our next research questions are really, has it peaked in biomass? Are there further increases? How much more than 2/3 of the aquatic plant biomass in the lake will take up? And also, what are the ecological impacts of this as well for our lake restoration goals and also to nutrient cycling? And I think we'll join in Ontario with the rest of kind of the Great Lakes region that we need to develop effective control and management strategies. So if anybody has any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. And please, yeah, I'd like to hear suggestions on what's going on in other areas as well. So,
thank you very much, Brian. That was wonderful. Folks, please, we've got over 60 people on, which is fantastic. So please, if you have a question, if you could type it in the chat box, and I will try and get them to Brian. How many, I'll try and get to as many as we can here for a few minutes. Provide a copy of your slides. Yes, Brian has already given me his PowerPoint presentation. We will be posting that and a recording of this whole session up on the Starry Stonewort Collaborative website, starrystonewort.org. So give us a little bit of time, it'll be up there. Andrea Kirkwood says, great presentation, Brian.
Thank you, Andrew.
Anything else? I will say one thing we enjoyed down here, Brian, you mentioned getting people at the boat launches to educate folks about cleaning their boats up. We have a very good program out of Finger Lakes Institute run by my coworker Sam, and we put college students at, I can't remember, 23 different locations or something across our region, and it's been pretty effective. They pay or not, they're just located at these boat launches, and people, they try and explain to them, what invasive species are and where has the boat been before launching, and all that, and try and clean the boat off before and after, and have information, try and explain to people. Because clearly, I don't know if you want to speak more to this, but clearly that's how this stuff is spreading. Particularly through the Trent Severn waterway, it appears to me that probably how it spreads through boats.
I think it's a direct link to Lake Ontario. So anything that arrives to Lake Ontario or Lake Huron, I think it's coming through on boats. So quagga and zebra mussels almost certainly arrive to Lake Simcoe through there, and almost definitely Starry Stonewort would have as well. I think when you look at the pattern of where sightings have been reported in Southern Ontario, I mean, it's a direct track along that one canal system. So.
Okay, we got a bunch of questions coming in. Great talk. For the deeper sites within Lake Simcoe, where Starry Stonewort is present, is there a record of antheridae presence anywhere? It would be interesting to see if the shift to sexual reproduction occurs like within the native range for the deeper sites.
No, I've only found like the actual stars or the actual kind of the orange ball. So I think they're all like male plants that we're finding. So this is this elusive kind of female Starry Stonewort that we've been looking for that I don't think, I'm not aware of any being found across the Great Lakes region.
Okay, would you recommend rake sampling or ponars to try and document presence, absence, and density of Starry Stonewort?
I used the ponar grab just because I wanted a kind of like a defined biomass from an area, but in terms of finding new stuff, I would say the rake sampling is probably better. And I've used the method that's used across kind of upstate New York, kind of that point intersect rake toss relative abundance method, where you kind of find out the relative or the percentage of species between the different ones in the rake sampling. So in terms of finding new and different stuff, rake toss sampling certainly would be good for that. And it's kind of a quasi quantitative as well. You can kind of see like what the percentage is on these rake toss samplings.
Thank you. Great presentation. Can you talk a bit more about movement of Starry Stonewort and waterfowl feathers?
I'm no expert on it. I've seen a couple of articles about it. Lakeline magazine from the North American Lake Management Society, they had an article, I think it was 2010, there was an article that came out about Starry Stonewort. I think it was in Michigan or Minnesota, 10 years of monitoring is what it was called. And yeah, really, they found some evidence in that of it being kind of stuck into like duck feathers and also geese feathers as well as being transported. So I think that's the only way that I'm aware of that it could have got into these stormwater ponds that we found in Aurora Newmarket. So I'm not sure how prevalent it is, like being spread that way. I would say probably 90% of the spread is probably by boat traffic being caught up in propellers and stuff. So.
Great presentation, Brian. Would like to know your thoughts on control and management strategies. Would like to talk with you further on developing best management practices. It's from Ed Polensny. Sorry, Ed, I messed up your last name.
That's all right. And just to mention, we're on the Trent Severn Waterway in Stony Clear and White Lakes.
Oh, excellent. Yep.
With the Environment Council there.
Okay, great. Welcome. Yeah, those are some of our newest records, are Stony Lake and also Big Cedar Lake up in kind of that section of the Trent Severn Waterway. So yeah, anything that can be done to management, that we're really kind of all in the same boat looking how do we control and how do we manage this new invader before it kind of takes over the entire lake.
Is there any thoughts around control and management strategies, like around competing species or native species?
I'm not really sure anything can outcompete Starry Stonewort. Once it gets a hold on, I think is kind of like a slow grower first thing in the season. So I think where Eurasian water milfoil kind of takes off first thing in the spring, as soon as the weather gets warm, it grows very fast and kind of shades out anything that's below it. I don't know if that has a potential to keep Starry Stonewort in check, where Starry Stonewort really doesn't increase in biomass until kind of late July, early August sort of things. But you don't want to spread Eurasian water milfoil around your lake either. So maybe if there's a native milfoil, but still they don't have the same canopy as well that Eurasian water milfoil.
Yeah, would be great to get your input in on this best management practices with Severn and M&R.
Certainly, yeah.
Thank you very much.
A great follow-on question. Is Starry Stonewort outcompeting Cara in areas where Cara is already established? Or was
It seems to be, yeah. We've also seen a decline in the amount of Cara that's in the lake. So Cara was kind of the dominant shallow water species in the early years, and it was kind of outcompeted by Eurasian water milfoil. And even in areas that were high Cara biomass, where Starry Stonewort gets in, it just seems to roll right over top of it.
If you only have a little bit of starry in your sample, what do you see to note the starry as opposed to lots of other vegetation?
We pick it apart, yeah. So we identify them using like counting the holes, if you will, on the outside.
Oh, this is from Michelle. She's our next webinar next month. Has there been any strategic monitoring for Starry Stonewort and water bodies outside of the Ontario area, i.e. other parts of Canada?
I'm not aware of any, not at all. Quebec might have something, but I haven't seen anything on the scale. And even in Ontario as well, I would say we've been lacking in Starry Stonewort monitoring. So it's kind of something that you have to get the message out and then hopefully kind of go out and do some targeted monitoring on it.
Do you think the treating and reducing the milfoil contributed to the Starry Stonewort spread?
It certainly did in that Lagoon City site, and also in the in the few marinas where they had permission to use the herbicide to kind of knock that back. I would say it took over everything. As soon as you get clear water with lots of phosphorus in it and a little bit of Starry Stonewort, it just grows like crazy.
All right. Any other questions, folks? My list stopped here. You guys all of a sudden stopped typing. Just a couple more things to say. Thank you again, Brian. This is wonderful. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Had over 60 people, which is just exciting. The next webinar is in a couple weeks, June 9th. Michelle Nault from the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources should be discussing a variety of applications, not applications, variety of control techniques that have been applied through various locations in Wisconsin. I met Brian in person last year and had a great talk with him. I've met Michelle a couple times in person, another wonderful person. So these are going to be good presentations. And then in July, we hope to have Dan Larkin from Minnesota, and August, we hope to have Blake Cahill from Central Michigan. I will keep sending out notices about those via my emailing and the Facebook, and I may try and so look for updates on that stuff. I may try and ask some others to do some additional presentations in between here too. Let's see, a couple more questions real quick. Last ones, because we're almost at 11 here. Oh man, jumping in here. Okay, I can't get all these before 11 here. What conversations have you had with TSW?
I don't want to throw anybody under the bus here, but they're remarkably cryptic at answering emails and dealing with people. So we've been trying to get water quality data from them for about a decade, and it's like trying to get blood from a stone. And same thing, I've talked, the waterway is actually managed by the National Parks Service, and yeah, they have, I think, 1 or 2 plant people, and they haven't been very forthcoming with sharing any of their data. So I wish the relationship was better, but.
I was asked for how to be added to your email list. I am sending quickest way at this point, putting my email out there to everybody, and also go to the website. About one more question. Maybe 2 more. I don't want to tie everybody up here. We got lots of wonderful questions coming, my goodness. Do bulbils dissolve? How long do we think they can persist in sediment, even if they aren't viable?
No, that's an interesting question. I'm not really sure. I haven't seen any research on that sort of thing, so I don't know if they can last under for a long-term record, like in a sediment core or something like that. That's a really interesting thing.
Okay. Carly from Minnesota posted a nice, she said, we see Starry Stonewort aggressively outcompeting Caras in Minnesota. If you're interested in that topic, there's a recorded webinar on Starry Stonewort impacts here. And she put a link there for everybody to see.
Well, excellent. Thank you.
Great to hear about Starry Stonewort trends in other regions. Carly's done some really neat work, I gotta say. I've read her, seen her presentation and read some stuff. Andrea Kirkwood concurs with Brian. That's good. Got the experts agreeing on things. Let's see, great talk. Andrea says it can last a few months. I think that means the bulbils. Following up on Liz's question, have you done any deep core sampling to determine when Starry Stonewort was established?
We haven't, no. There has been some sediment coring in the lake, and it was mainly to reconstruct like phosphorus records, dissolved oxygen records, that sort of thing. But it all predates 2009, I think, the core collection. So we haven't seen any evidence in the cores of Starry Stonewort. And there was some pigment studies done on it too, but I'm not aware of anything that identified Starry Stonewort prior to 2009.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. You know, email me, go to the website, there's contact information there. This was wonderful. Thank you, Brian, again.
Thank you very much.
Join us next month already, June 9th, for Michelle's presentation, which I know is really good because I've kind of seen a version of it before and it's excellent. More thank yous coming into Brian from a variety of people, so that's great.
Thank you for attending. It's great.
So everyone have a great day, great week. I hope we all manage to keep moving forward through this pandemic as things are opening up slowly, and hopefully we'll get all safe and get all our field work done too. So thanks everyone. Take care.